The Galactic Senate, the very heart of the Republic's governance, was an institution built upon centuries of law, diplomacy, and democratic ideals. Its senators, though often mired in corruption and bureaucracy, still represented the collective will of thousands of star systems. These ideals stood in stark contrast to the Sith, whose dark philosophy and pursuit of power had long been the Republic's most fearsome adversary. The Sith, once thought extinct, were the embodiment of manipulation, cruelty, and unchecked ambition. Their enmity with the Jedi Order and the Republic spanned millennia, culminating in devastating wars that had scarred the galaxy. The revelation that the highest-ranking figures of the Republic, Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, Darth Sidious, and his enforcer, Darth Vader, were Sith Lords would send seismic shockwaves through the Senate and beyond. The Senate had always been a fractious body, composed of beings from countless worlds, each with its own agendas and concerns. However, despite their divisions, there were unifying threads that bound them together. Chief among these was their mutual respect for the Republic's democratic principles and their shared dread of the Sith. Even the most corrupt senators, those who lined their pockets with bribes or served private interests, would balk at the idea of Sith influence, for the Sith were not merely political adversaries. They represented the antithesis of everything the Republic stood for. The knowledge that Darth Sidious and Darth Vader had seized the levers of power within the Republic itself would be an unforgivable betrayal. The discovery of their true identities would most likely arise through a confluence of unlikely events. A whistleblower from within the Empire, a desperate Jedi survivor uncovering definitive proof, or even a careless slip by one of the Sith themselves could expose the truth. However, what would truly ignite the Senate's fury was the realization that this revelation did not merely implicate two men. It exposed the colossal failure of the Republic's institutions to safeguard its ideals and citizens. For years, Palpatine had manipulated events with surgical precision, ascending to power and consolidating his authority under the guise of protecting the Republic from external threats. The Clone Wars, ostensibly fought to defend the Republic from the separatist movement, had in truth been engineered by Sidious to dismantle the Republic from within. The war's devastation, the Emergency Powers Act, and the reorganization of the Republic into the Galactic Empire, all of it would now be seen in a far darker light. The initial response from the Senate would be one of disbelief and horror. It would take only a few brave senators, those like Mon Mothma or Bail Organa, to seize upon the revelation and demand answers. These individuals, already suspicious of Palpatine's authoritarian rule, would become catalysts for widespread outrage. The Senate chamber would descend into chaos as accusations flew and fear spread like wildfire. Those who had allied themselves with the Emperor, knowingly or not, would scramble to distance themselves. Meanwhile, the minority of senators who had resisted the Empire's rise would feel vindicated but deeply endangered. If Sidious and Vader were Sith Lords, then their retaliation would be swift and merciless. The revelation would also galvanize resistance movements across the galaxy. The rebellion, which until this point had been a scattered collection of cells united only by their opposition to the Empire, would find an unprecedented surge of recruits and resources. The knowledge that their enemy was not merely an oppressive regime but the manifestation of ancient evil would create a sense of moral urgency. The Jedi, whose numbers had been decimated, would also play a critical role. Even a lone Jedi Knight like Luke Skywalker would symbolize hope in the face of despair. The Jedi's ancient role as protectors against the Sith would make their resurgence a rallying point for those disillusioned by the Empire. However, the Sith were nothing if not cunning. Sidious, aware of the precariousness of his position, would undoubtedly have contingency plans. He might orchestrate false flag operations, painting the Senate's accusers as liars or terrorists. The Imperial propaganda machine would go into overdrive, framing Sidious as a misunderstood leader whose use of the dark side was a necessary evil to bring stability to the galaxy. The more fanatical supporters of the Empire, such as Grand Moff Tarkin, would readily embrace this narrative, arguing that the Sith's methods were justified by their results. Such rhetoric, though abhorrent to many, would likely find some traction among those who feared chaos more than tyranny. But Darth Vader was a wild card. Unlike Sidious, whose duplicity ran as deep as his power, Vader's motivations were more conflicted. His loyalty to the Sith was intertwined with personal pain and loss. The revelation of his Sith identity to the Senate would place him in an awkward position, forcing him to confront the galaxy's unified hatred of the Sith. Could such a confrontation sow seeds of doubt in Vader, perhaps nudging him closer to redemption? Or would he double down on his allegiance, crushing dissent with a ferocity that only he could muster? For the average citizen of the galaxy, the news would be a staggering blow. To the inhabitants of Coruscant, once the jewel of the Republic and now the heart of the Empire, the betrayal would be deeply personal. Coruscant citizens had witnessed Palpatine's rise firsthand, cheering him as a hero who had saved them from war. Learning that he was a Sith Lord, the very enemy they had been taught to fear, would shatter their trust in leadership. Across the Outer Rim, where the Empire's rule was often felt as unrelenting oppression, the Sith revelation would only validate the deep resentment held against Coruscant's elite. The galaxy was already a tinderbox under the Empire's iron fist. The exposure of Sidious and Vader as Sith Lords would be the spark that set it ablaze. But the Sith, for all their flaws, were master strategists. They would not go down without a fight, and their retaliation would undoubtedly plunge the galaxy into an even darker chapter of its history. The Senate's outrage, no matter how fervent, would not guarantee action. Palpatine's years of meticulous manipulation had left the institution weak and fractured, filled with senators too fearful or self-serving to act decisively. Even with undeniable proof of Sidious and Vader's Sith identities, there would be those who hesitated. Some would argue that the revelation, while troubling, was no reason to upend the Empire. After all, Palpatine had delivered peace, however brutal, after the chaos of the Clone Wars. These senators, either blinded by pragmatism or paralyzed by fear, would counsel caution. They would frame resistance as a risk to the fragile stability the galaxy had achieved under Imperial rule. Meanwhile, Sidious himself would likely seize control of the narrative. A master manipulator, he would exploit the galaxy's divisions to sow confusion and doubt. The Senate would face a barrage of Imperial propaganda designed to discredit the revelation. Sidious might claim that accusations of his being a Sith were fabrications by dissidents seeking to destabilize the Empire. He could use the Jedi Purge to his advantage, portraying the Jedi Order as treacherous and painting any surviving Jedi as remnants of a failed regime desperate to regain their lost power. These tactics, combined with the Empire's overwhelming control of communication channels, would ensure that the truth remained clouded for many. Yet not all would be deceived. The sheer weight of evidence, combined with the Sith's historic reputation as the Republic's greatest enemy, would stir defiance in the hearts of many. Senators like Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, already operating in secret to form the Rebel Alliance, would find their cause suddenly legitimized. The revelation would embolden them to take bolder steps, openly recruiting sympathizers within the Senate and the wider galaxy. These efforts would not be without risk. The Empire would surely respond with ruthless efficiency, silencing dissenters through arrests, assassinations, and public executions. But for every senator or citizen the Empire silenced, a dozen more would begin to question the regime. The revelation would also lay bare the complicity of those who had supported Palpatine's rise. Senators who had voted to grant him emergency powers, to extend his term indefinitely, or to dissolve the Republic in favor of the Empire would face intense scrutiny. While some would attempt to recast themselves as victims of manipulation, others would dig in their heels, defending their choices and aligning themselves fully with the Sith. This polarization would transform the Senate from a largely ceremonial body under the Empire into a battleground for the galaxy's future. Darth Vader's role in this scenario would be critical. Unlike Sidious, whose power stemmed from cunning and manipulation, Vader's influence was rooted in fear. The revelation of his Sith identity would deepen this fear but also render him a symbol of the Empire's brutality. His presence on Coruscant or in the Senate chamber itself would become a grim reminder of the Sith's grip on the galaxy. Yet, beneath the armor and the menace, Vader's internal conflict would inevitably rise to the surface. The widespread condemnation of the Sith could chip away at the veneer of absolute loyalty he displayed toward Sidious. In rare moments of introspection, the weight of the galaxy's hatred might force Vader to confront the choices that had led him down this dark path. For Sidious, the exposure would be a test of his unparalleled strategic mind. He would likely move to consolidate his power further, declaring martial law across the galaxy under the pretext of quelling a manufactured rebellion. The Senate, or what remained of it, would face dissolution or be reduced to a powerless advisory council. The Emperor's enforcers, including the Inquisitors and other dark side adherents, would be unleashed to crush resistance with unparalleled ferocity. The Sith's philosophy of domination through fear would become the Empire's unvarnished doctrine, erasing any remaining pretense of benevolence. But the very act of tightening his grip could backfire. The galaxies disenfranchised, the Outer Rim worlds exploited for resources, the enslaved species forced into labor, and the countless families shattered by Imperial tyranny, would see the revelation as a call to arms. The rebellion, still in its infancy, would find itself flooded with recruits, from disillusioned senators to ordinary citizens seeking to strike back against the Sith. Even within the Imperial military, cracks could begin to form. Officers who had served loyally out of a sense of duty might question their allegiance upon learning that their leaders were Sith Lords. A coup or mutiny, though unlikely on a large scale, could deal significant blows to the Empire's stability. The Jedi, though few in number, would see this moment as an opportunity to fulfill their ancient mandate. The revelation of the Sith's dominance would galvanize surviving Jedi like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda, as well as untrained Force sensitives scattered across the galaxy. The Jedi's reemergence, however small, would inspire hope and serve as a rallying point for those seeking to overthrow the Sith. Luke Skywalker, still largely unknown at this point, would find himself thrust into a pivotal role as the galaxy's last, best hope against the Sith Lords. Coruscant, as the political and cultural center of the galaxy, would become a focal point of resistance and repression. The planet's population, already chafing under Imperial rule, would be uniquely positioned to resist the Sith's dominance. Underground movements, coordinated by rebel sympathizers and emboldened senators, could turn the planet into a hotbed of insurrection. The Imperial presence on Coruscant, though formidable, would face the daunting challenge of suppressing an uprising in the galaxy's most densely populated world. Ultimately, the exposure of Sidious and Vader as Sith Lords would be a turning point in galactic history. It would not immediately topple the Empire or restore the Republic, but it would ignite a fire that could not be extinguished. The Sith's legacy of manipulation, betrayal, and tyranny would face its greatest challenge as the galaxy united against them. The fight would be long and bloody, but the revelation would plant the seeds of hope, proving that even the darkest tyranny could not endure forever.